Seems like for the past couple of years, every so many months, we've been speculating about what the Nintendo Switch 2 or Switch Pro could be when it's coming out. And as somebody who was initially very critical of the Switch, I would say, over the past 8 months, started to play some of the games I missed and look at some of the new niche releases. And I think there's a lot to enjoy now on the console, but the experience of playing it is starting to feel decidedly old. And I think Nintendo certainly must be at this point working on a replacement. So I want to talk today about my top 5 wishes for the next Switch. So to start with, at number 5, I think Nintendo needs to fix some of its mistakes with the current generation Switch, and that starts with the controllers. The Joy-Cons have notably suffered from analog stick drift issues, and I've always thought that the Pro controllers were not that great. They feel imprecise. There's a slight rattle to the D-pad and the buttons before you depress them. It doesn't feel like a super high quality product, which is a shame because the Pro controllers are actually quite expensive. And as somebody who games primarily on the TV, I wish they could be better. I haven't experienced any issues with the Joy-Cons, but again, I don't use them that frequently. So what I'd like to see is obviously a redesign to correct all of the technical issues, but I'd like to see a controller that has some style, that has some flair to it, that harkens back to some great Nintendo designs. They could start with the D-pad. I think many people would agree that the SNES D-pad is still one of the best, if not the best, out there. And if they could just replicate that, that's a step in the right direction. What the PlayStation 5 controller has shown you is that there is a way to produce a controller that looks unique and that has some really interesting technology and that feels decidedly upscale and high quality. So I'm not saying that the Switch necessarily needs to do all the kind of fancy haptic feedback that the PS5 controller does, but just, look at the design, the lighting cues. For example, I'd like to see backlit buttons that are user programmable, where you could come up with different styles for the backlight. So you could go with, for example, a Super Famicom, candy button look like the original Super Famicom controller. You could do a Virtual Boy theme. You could do a US SNES theme. I just think that would be a cool addition, assuming that they, again, correct some of the flaws with those previous controllers. And next up, as far as correcting issues, I think it's time for Nintendo to really improve their online infrastructure. I don't subscribe to the Nintendo Online service. I'm not really an online multiplayer person, but everyone I've heard talk about it suggests that, it is a generation behind its competitors, and it doesn't really offer a lot of value to the buyer. So I've always thought that what they should do is really come up with a Netflix-style subscription service and use their back catalog of games effectively. And I've always thought that that would be best served with like a Nintendo Power-style on-screen interface where you can read about the history of the game, where you can look at tips and tricks. It would be your gateway to the online communities that surround them, and not just limit it to a couple releases a month. Give us 100 games, give us, one genre by month. Let's see how a series evolved over time. Develop this service with a true sense of curation and respect for your history, and just not release it as a half-hearted cash grab. So, I think there's a space for that kind of service, and I'd like to see it on the new Switch. So, number 3, I'd like to come to the graphical capabilities of the console. I don't believe Nintendo is going to target a system that can hit 4K 60 or 120. I think they're still going to try to occupy the space just below Sony and Microsoft. But I would like to see them take 1080p 60 and implement that across all games. so that on this new console, nothing will drop below 60 frames per second. And perhaps, because I believe it's technically possible, they could integrate some mild HDR. I think that would be a major quality improvement. As I've played some of the larger new releases for the Switch, Shin Megami Tensei 5, the Pokemon Arceus game, they really do suffer from just a very uncomfortable frame rate. Now, that might be because I'm coming from high frame rate PC gaming or PS5, Xbox Series X, but they just feel slow, they feel old, they feel a massive downgrade from what else is out there. But I think if you just got that up to 60 frames per second, I don't mind it being 1080p. And again, if you can integrate HDR, that would be awesome. What I don't want to see is them target 4K because they think they need to and have the frame rate tank depending on what's on screen or some kind of dynamic resolution. Like I think, a hard lock at 1080p 60 would serve Nintendo properties really well. And at number 2, and connected to that, is backwards compatibility with the current Switch, but not just backwards compatibility, but the ability to run current gen Switch games at 60 frames per second. Again, there's a huge catalog. As the Switch ages, there are a lot of games being released, and if I can go back into my collection and play them at an enhanced frame rate, that would, I think, add a lot of value, certainly to me. Now, if they want to upscale and stuff like that on the older games, or give you a couple different, visual parameters that you can adjust, great. But again, I think that 60 frames per second is the sweet spot. And I would certainly go back and play a lot of the games that maybe I didn't finish because I moved on to something else, as the experience just didn't feel premium enough. And my number one wish for the new Switch is, okay, we've got the mistakes corrected. We've got a reasonable graphical target. So to show you the power of this new console and what it can do, they need to have F-Zero as either a pack-in game or a release game. It's been years since we've had an F-Zero game, and I think F-Zero was essentially a great tech demo. Certainly on the SNES, it kind of felt that way to me. On the N64, wasn't quite a tech demo on the GameCube, but it was a great game on the GameCube. And since then, what has it been? 18 years, 19 years since they have released an F-Zero game. I think it would be a wonderful bit of nostalgia for fans, and it's just a fun game. It's an easy game, relatively to program. It doesn't have to be a deep Breath of the Wild open world game, but it could really demonstrate the power of this console versus the old Switch. So I know that's kind of a pipe dream, but I would love to see F-Zero day one on the Switch too. So those are my top 5 wishes for the new Switch. What are yours? Let me know down below.